Most empaths are not lonely because they give too little, and not because they are too sensitive. They are lonely because they built their entire lives around always being available, and because, almost without noticing, availability turned into a system in which no one is required anymore to truly meet them. Empaths learn very early to leave themselves in relationships so that others will stay, not as a conscious choice, but as an adaptation that once protected connection. That is hard to hear, because it questions everything you were taught about closeness. Empathy is seen as something good, something that connects, soothes, creates trust, and keeps things together. And that is true. Up to a point. Because the moment empathy stops being a skill you can use and becomes the foundation of the entire relationship system, depth disappears. Not suddenly, not violently, but predictably. What forms instead is a quiet one-way street. When you constantly sense what others need, when you respond before anything is even said, when you create closeness through balance and compensation, you train your environment not to actively perceive you anymore as a center. Not because they don't like you, but because your system allows them to pass over you without ever having to stop. The price for this is not conflict, not drama. The price is loneliness inside relationships. The feeling of being present and still having no place. Chapter 1. Everyone sees you. No one meets you. Mina is 34 and works remotely. She is the person who immediately notices when something shifts in a group, when someone pulls back, when a sentence lands too heavy, when the atmosphere tilts slightly off balance. She steps in before it becomes visible. She smooths things out, explains, connects, diffuses. Not because anyone asks her to, but because she learned early that closeness depends on no one feeling uncomfortable for too long. After meetings, Mina doesn't go home feeling useful. She goes home feeling overlooked. Not because people were unkind, not because anyone hurt her, but because once again she perceived everything, and no one perceived her. This loneliness is silent. It has no clear trigger, but it hurts precisely because nothing is obviously wrong. At some point, Mina stops texting first, not as a strategy, not to set boundaries, but because she can't bear anymore being the only one who always comes back. What follows is no escalation, no questions, no, "Are you okay?" It simply goes quiet. And in that quiet, Mina realizes something she avoided for a long time. She was never too much. She was structurally too available. Chapter 2. The system that makes you replaceable. Mina has been living in Kyoto for 2 years. The city is calm, ordered, almost polite in its restraint. Trains arrive on time. Conflicts are avoided. Mina loves this order. Maybe because it resembles her own inner organization. In a small cafe near the Kamo River, she sits with colleagues from her remote team. She listens, translates unspoken tensions, adds humor when conversations drift toward discomfort. As always, she becomes the stability in the room. No one notices that she hasn't said anything about herself, not because it would be forbidden, but because it doesn't seem necessary within the existing structure. And this is exactly where the system lives. When you regulate in every situation, a quiet habituation sets in. Your environment learns that you function, not that you feel. This is not a character flaw. It is a structure formed through repetition, and structures work, even when no one consciously designed them. Chapter 3. You left yourself behind. This is where it becomes uncomfortable. Mina never actively decided to put herself second. She learned that it is safer to be needed than to be seen. Being needed creates control. Being seen creates risk. If you are seen, you can be rejected. If you are needed, you stay necessary. So she learned early to read the room before entering it, to fulfill needs before they were spoken, to turn down her own impulses so no one would feel overwhelmed. It looks noble, almost mature, but it is self-betrayal. Not dramatic, not loud, but happening in thousands of small moments where she chose to be understanding instead of honest. And every time she left herself behind, she became more reliable for others and more invisible. Chapter 4. Why empaths often have narcissists around them. Empaths tend to attract the wrong people, not always, but noticeably often. Not by chance, not mystically, but structurally. People with narcissistic traits feel comfortable in empathic systems, not because empaths are weak, but because they stabilize before anything escalates. A narcissist doesn't need open conflict, they need a counterpart who regulates. You explain before they have to. You soften before their behavior is examined. You look for faults in yourself before they take responsibility. This creates a relationship where one reflects and the other simply exists. The danger is not open devaluation. It is the opposite. You feel needed, important, and at the same time, you begin to doubt your own perception. Empaths don't attract narcissists because they need them. They attract them because their system sets no point where narcissistic behavior meets resistance. That is why these dynamics last so long. Not because of love, not because of fate, but because of structure. Chapter 5. Ma, the space you never allowed. Late one evening, Mina walks through the narrow streets of Gion. Paper lanterns cast warm light onto wet stone. In Japanese thinking, there is Ma, the space between things that allows movement to happen. If you close every gap immediately, no one has to move toward you. If you dissolve every tension, no one has to take responsibility. Mina confused closeness with seamlessness, and by doing so, prevented anyone from ever stepping toward her. Chapter 6. Why you almost go back. This is the most dangerous part. The old system feels familiar, calm, reassuring. Because availability gives instant confirmation, silence does not. The new system feels empty, uncertain, cold. Not because it's wrong, but because it no longer offers a role. This is where many return, not out of weakness, but out of fear of meaninglessness. Chapter 7. Zanshin. In a Zen temple, Mina sits in silence. No one asks, no one regulates. Zanshin means remaining present without securing yourself. You are there, but you don't jump. This is not withdrawal. It is groundedness. Chapter 8. What you can no longer ignore. You don't simply lose people when you stop being constantly available. What you lose are the dynamics in which your availability was the condition for closeness. And those dynamics were never built on reciprocity, but on adaptation. What changes is not your value. It is the role you adopted over years to secure connection. That role feels familiar because it worked for a long time, but it was never your identity. From here on, it is no longer about whether you adapt again. It is about who you are when you don't.